establishment want to hang, and they will if we don't stop them. Best known to me as a friend of my auntie, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you so much to everyone that's come here today. Those that are looking out of the windows up there, hello, how you doing? All those on the balconies all around, and anyone that's following it on social media, on Facebook. I hope the sound holds better up this time than it did last time. Thank you all for coming today. This is the 40th campaign event we've done since this campaign began towards the end of July. And this fire truck, this wonderful fire truck, has been there in the wind, in the rain, all over the country. Only on Thursday, 2 days ago, we had a massive rally in the centre of Stoke-on-Trent with this same fire truck. And I want to say a huge thank you to all our friends in the Fire Brigade Union. For affiliating to the party, all the support they've given, and all the work that firefighters do day in, day out to keep us all safe. And make sure that the fire service is properly funded, and also make sure that flood protection duties become a statutory obligation on the fire service so they get the funding they need to deal with the very difficult issues they dealt with so brilliantly last winter. Can we hear it for the firefighters? And you've heard all the speakers today. You've heard people speaking on behalf of WASPI, you've heard the health service, you've heard local councillors, you've heard anti-racist campaigns, you've heard a whole range of people, all coming together because they want to achieve something together. What our campaign is about is bringing together people with hopes, with ideas, with ambitions for all of us, not just for themselves. It's about uniting people as to the kind of world, kind of society, and kind of politics that we want to take us there. You've all come here today with views, I'm sure, on what you want to see, ambitions of what you want for yourselves, your family, your friends, your community, and everybody else, but a realisation that when you bring together that collective strength and that collective wisdom, things do change. A year ago, just over a year ago, when the issue of the leadership of the Labour Party came up and we decided we would try and contest it, and I'm glad we did. We then had that amazing mandate, and people say, well, what's changed since then? I'll tell you this, just a couple of things. First of all, last summer, the Labour Party in Parliament was abstaining on a welfare reform bill that was going to take £12 billion out of the pockets of the most desperate people in our society. I am not abstaining when poor people are having money ripped out of their pockets by a Tory government. And we are not going into the blame culture of those people that quite legitimately apply for DWP support. And actually, I don't even like using the word welfare. As far as I'm concerned, it should be called social security. The security for all of us. And just over a year ago, we as a party, whilst we had many very good things in that election manifesto, there was a problem. And the problem was that we were supporting the continuation of the pay freeze in the public sector, which in reality was a pay cut. We were offering up further cuts in crucial services, and we weren't fully understanding the terrible cuts that have taken place, particularly in local government over the last 6 years. And so, The first thing we did was to appoint John McDonnell as the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, and the first thing John did was to make it quite clear that the policy of austerity, the policy of cutting back on public spending, the policy of rolling back the performance of the state in people's lives, in health and housing and education, was at an end. As far as we're concerned, austerity is a political choice made by the right, who are trying to say that the banking crisis of 2008 was caused by too much public expenditure, and that by a process of austerity, somehow or other, you'll deal with it. 6 years of austerity have brought us what? Greater inequality, greater levels of poverty, longer housing waiting lists, more overcrowding in the schools, greater indebtedness in our National Health Service, and too many people working in insecure jobs on zero-hours contracts, as Ian so brilliantly pointed out in his speech. There is a different and alternative way of doing things. There's a different and alternative way of doing our politics. So just as much as we disagree with top-down, trickle-down economics, we also disagree with top-down, hand-me-down politics, that where policies are decided at the top and the rest have to like it or lump it. Let's do it all the other way round. And so I want to say a big thank you to everyone in Thanet for all the work they've done over the past years. I was here in the general election campaigning and knocking on doors, and I was so pleased when, whilst we didn't win the general election seats in Thanet, we did win that fantastic by-election in Newington when Karen Constantine got elected. I was so delighted by that, because it shows that when you offer a real alternative, when you offer an alternative of inclusion, you don't go down the road of blaming the nearest minority for the problems of everybody and everything else. Instead, you bring people together. There is a resonance. That is what the Labour movement is about. That is what these community events are about. That is what does change politics, does give hope, does give opportunity, and ultimately the whole society is better off for it. That is what is so strong about this united movement here in Thanet. So if you're concerned about unemployment rates of 7% in this area, when the national rate is 4%, if you're concerned about the difference in income, the average income, weekly income across the South East, people in work, is £550. In Thanet, it's £400. You go through a whole list and you find lower wages, less job opportunities, less economic development in the area. The solution isn't to blame somebody because they live in Thanet and are doing their best and making the best of their lives and trying to make the community better. It's instead to say to our government, say to our party, and say to the policies that we need, the way forward is to invest in a growing economy, invest in young people, invest in health, invest in opportunity. And so John McDonnell has pointed out that a National Investment Bank of £500 billion nationally would help all parts of this country. They've got to be helped fairly, they've got to be helped equally, because some parts of the country, East Midlands and the North East in particular, have often been starved of investment, and this whole area of East Kent has also suffered high unemployment, low wages, and all the difficulties that go with that. So that investment can do an awful lot of things. That investment can bring better communications, not just rail, also broadband. That investment can be investment in housing, which is so absolutely crucial, and I'll come back to that in a moment. That investment can also be in a digital economy, but also be in sustainable green energy jobs. You look down there, you see that massive wind farm. See the jobs that can be created if we had a proper system of feed-in tariffs to encourage, not penalise people for trying to generate their own electricity, or communities trying to generate their own electricity. So it's about the kind of society that we want to live in. Let's just take a couple of examples which you've heard some stuff about today. Take housing, for example. We live in a country which is one of the top 5 richest in the world. We live in a country where we have a tradition of a national health service. We have a tradition of a welfare state. We have a tradition of the idea that there should be a safety net for all of us. But I see massive holes in that safety net, and I see massive inequality. Is a society happy if a minority can afford to buy a Ferrari and a Maserati or a McLaren and drive slowly past those who are sleeping on the street because there's nowhere for them to live? Is that a comfortable society to be in? And is it good that so many of our children are growing up in households where sadly the parents haven't got jobs, sadly they cannot get a council house because there aren't enough available or enough have been built, so are living in short-term rented, 6 months short-hold tenancies in the private rented sector, sometimes, sadly too often, in appalling conditions, and then the tenancy is up after 6 months, they have to move on, and those children have to move on with it to yet another school, yet another community, yet another attempt to make friends and fit in with everybody else. Surely to goodness, we owe it to that whole generation of children at the moment living in insecure housing to build the council housing, to give the lifetime tenancy, to give them the security they need. To give them the security they need in order to be able to develop themselves so well at school. Why is it that we have nearly 1 million people working when they don't know what their income is going to be from one week to the other because they're on a 0 hours contract? They don't know if the employer is going to ring them up and offer them a job. Sometimes the employer calls and says, yeah, I really do need you today. Can you make your way down to the shop, the call centre, the factory, the office, whatever it happens to be? And then they're on the bus going down there, and they get another call saying, sorry, I made a mistake, I don't need you today, go back home again. Is it right that you try and live, bring up a family, where you don't even know what your income's going to be, you have no security of what that employment should be? And then if you think these things are isolated, they're not. Take the example of Shirebrook in Nottinghamshire. Shirebrook was a colliery. Shirebrook was a coal mine. Shirebrook had a strong community, a strong trade union in the National Union of Mine Workers, and a very efficient place it was too. Thatcher came along intent on destroying manufacturing industry in this country and destroying the trade unions that had helped protect so many people. Then look there now to Shirebrook. What do you find there? A Sports Direct warehouse, where those working in it are employed by an agency employing them. And even an all-party select committee in Parliament came to a unanimous agreement that the place was disgraceful, the treatment was disgusting, the denial of wages was appalling, the safety of workers in there having to rely on an ambulance service and a fire service to turn up and protect them from the dangerous conditions had to change. And as a result of that and the work of Unite the Union, £1 million is now being repaid in unpaid wages to those people in Sport Direct. But don't think this big economics culture is unique to Sport Direct. Look at the RBS stores that have been closed all over the country, the jobs that have been lost, the supply chain jobs that have been lost, whilst the owner, conveniently living in a tax haven in Monaco, jets in and out to make the decisions about whether the shops should stay or the shops should go, whether the jobs should stay or the jobs should go. Can't we call time on the split economy in Britain? Can't we call time on the idea that you deregulate endlessly in order to create growth, when in reality you create inequality, misery, poverty and insecurity at the other end of it? And so it is about an an investment economy. It is about a living wage. It is about giving real opportunities to all these brilliant young people. Go to school, learn as much as they can, try and get into college, learn as much as they can. Yet they've lost the educational maintenance allowance that helped so many working class youngsters go through college and ultimately get into university. Then you see college places being cut, and then you see apprenticeships, some of which are absolutely brilliant in some companies, some of which are really just an excuse to exploit young people's goodwill and pay them very little. I want to see proper apprenticeships, an end to the youth rate of minimum wage, an end to the youth rate on the apprenticeship wage, and instead a proper living wage for everyone in work. And you know what? When you pay working people more, they spend it and the economy grows. When you give tax relief to the very rich, what do? They put it in a tax haven somewhere else, which is of no benefit to the rest of the economy. So it is about chasing down those tax havens and what goes with it. But it's also about giving opportunities to young people. So decent apprenticeships, reasonable levels of pay, and then when they go to university, want to achieve so much. For the first time this year, for the first time for many years, the proportion of working class students getting into university has gone down, and it looks like it's going to continue to go down. When you lift the cap on fees, when you expect students to graduate with debts of £50,000, it's a bit of a deterrent. And if people say, well, why should we subsidise the education of others? I simply say this. When I get on a train, I want to know it's been well made and well maintained. I want to know the person who designed that train knew what they were doing. When I get on a plane, I want to know the pilot is qualified, the maintenance engineers are qualified, and they've done the job properly. When you cross a road, you want to know that the person who maintained the traffic lights did the job properly and knew what they were doing. All of those people studied, educated, and became qualified. Yes, to some extent for themselves, but in reality, we all benefit from a well-qualified, well-trained society. We all benefit from a good doctor, or a good nurse, or a good teacher. It's all about whether you want to invest in society as a whole or not. And so we're suggesting a national education service that has the idea that education is for all of us, is a right for all of us, and should not be rationed as a privilege for those that can afford it, either for children trying to get a preschool place beyond 15 hours a week, or for students wanting to go to university, or for adults who want to return to education, maybe an evening classes, maybe part-time, but it's part of the adult education that's so important. And strengthen local authorities' role in education as the family of education, rather than set up every secondary school as a free school and academy to compete with the school down the road and see if they can get away with lower wages or worse working conditions for the teachers or anybody else working within it. But life is about developing an economy, of course. Life is about making sure people get jobs and housing, of course. Life is about all of those things, but it's also about all our cultural endeavours and ability. Think how many people really enjoy Folk Week in Broadstairs once a year. They enjoy it because it's a coming together, because it's a self-expression of culture, of ideas. People enjoy festivals, enjoy listening to cultures they've never thought about before, ideas they've never heard before, paintings they've never dreamt of before, poetry they didn't believe existed, and so many other things. Don't suppress that cultural idea, identity or ambition in everybody. Open it up, free it out. Therefore, make sure that all our children get a chance to learn music in school, that our local libraries, museums and art galleries do have enough money to stay open, so they're there for everybody, because that is what makes the creativity in us so good and so strong. We heard a brilliant speech a few minutes ago about our health service. Our health service was created by people who had real vision. Imagine what it was like when you were trying to survive in the late 19th century and you got ill. And if you had a few pennies together, you could possibly get a brief appointment with a doctor. Many didn't, and many died. Life expectancy was very short for working people. Life expectancy for children of the poor was often zero. So many died in childbirth. Great campaigners and great campaigns opened up local health facilities. Many trade unions did it, particularly the miners' union. They were determined that healthcare should be a right, not a privilege. And gradually that movement gained strength. But imagine how hard it was to campaign for the idea that getting ill should not be a financial penalty. Yes, none of us want to get ill. Yes, we're all fearful of being ill or injured or something else. But I want to live in a society where nobody is afraid of the bill because they get ill or injured. That we have the principle of a health service free at the point of use as a human right. Many people around the world don't have that. Much of our health service is being damaged at the present time. Damaged by the Health and Social Care Act, which allows so much to be put out to private tender. Damaged because of the private finance initiative contracts that are so damaging to the finances of every hospital, and those contracts are sold on to somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. But I tell you what, the health service has to keep paying. So last week, Diane Abbott and I launched our health programme at UCH Hospital, in which we said we want a Labour government to instruct the Treasury to take over and negotiate the running of those PFI contracts, bring them back in-house, and stop the penalty on the National Health Service offer. And we're also determined that our health service will deal with health inequalities. Health inequalities brought about by poverty, by bad housing. Health inequalities where the life expectancy in a poor area is much shorter than in a richer area. It's not right. Everyone should have access to decent health care just as much as they should have access to decent housing. But there's also the crisis of mental health provision across the whole of this country. A quarter of us here in this wonderful gathering today on the seafront in Ramsgate, during our lives are going to go through a crisis of stress, a crisis of isolation, which could be termed a mental health crisis. Some of us will get through it with the love and affection of friends and partners, family, neighbours and community. Some of us will get the help we need very quickly from very good doctors and healthcare professionals, and we'll get the talking therapy and whatever else we need. Some of us won't. Some of us will be frightened to talk about it. Some young men particularly will be very frightened to talk about it, and sadly take their own lives as a result of it because they can't talk about a problem that they're going through. And yet, those that go through an emergency have to wait many months sometimes for therapy. Those that are taken to emergency accommodation, it's often so far away that family, friends and nobody else can visit them. Some of them suffer very grievously. So let's agree on two things. One, all of us, every one of us, can change our language, change our attitude, change respect towards people going through a crisis, and treat it as we want to be treated ourselves, with decency, humanity and respect, and end the abuse of those with mental health conditions. And secondly, properly fund our mental health services so the claimed parity of esteem that the government offers becomes a reality of parity of care as well as parity of esteem. We are very, very determined to achieve that. This is at one level a contest for the leadership of the Labour Party that you're all aware of. But it's also about the way we do our politics. This is a public rally in an open space. Absolutely anybody can come. Be they a Labour supporter, hostile to Labour, disinterested in Labour, lover of Labour, just interested in politics and their ideas. I want a political process and a policy-making process that values the views of everybody, gives the chance bottom-up decision making. Gives a chance for that kind of democracy within our party, within our unions and within our community. Real devolution across the UK. An end to the elitism by the abolition of the House of Lords and replacement with an elected upper chamber. And those that say all this is way out of touch, I simply say this. In less than 15 months, 300,000 people have been attracted to this and joined the Labour Party, making it the biggest political party in Europe, the biggest social party anywhere across Europe. And so, yes, we have a lot of work to do to win a general election. Yes, we have a great deal of work to do. But we win that election by uniting communities. We win that election by showing that when we come together, we can create the jobs, we can build the housing, we can run the health service, we can have the transport infrastructure, the communications infrastructure we need through broadband and all the other methods. We need and can achieve all of that. So people will grow up in the idea that the next generation doesn't automatically have to be poorer than this generation. I'm fed up with being told by apparently very brilliant economists that my generation had it so good. We had the pensions, we had the free education, we had the free university education, we had the access to housing, but sadly it's not there for the next generation, and the one after that's going to be even worse off. Why are we listening to this stuff? Why are we accepting the idea that somehow or other the way forward in economics, the way forward in social policy, the way forward in social justice is greater poverty for those at the bottom, greater inequality for all of us, and the idea that somehow or other the super rich generously will send money from their tax havens to help us pay for our public services. I simply say to the super rich, and those that think tax evasion is a good thing and taxes are only for little people, I simply say this to them. One day they're going to be old. One day they might be ill. One day they might have a heart attack. One day their car might be in a crash. One day they might desperately need the help of a police officer or somebody else. One day they might be cut out of the wreckage of a car accident by brilliant people like our friends in the firefighters. Who paid for that? But all of us who paid our taxes in the proper way all this time. Who provided that concept of social justice? So I'm really proud to be here at this rally today in Thanet. I'm really proud of all the rallies we've held all over the country and all the discussions that we've had about hopes, about dreams, about democracy and about justice within our society and the way people can come together. When you turn in on each other, when you start blaming the nearest migrant family or the nearest refugee family for the problems you're in, when you start blaming somebody because they speak a different language, have a different nationality than you, you set off a whole circle of division, of hatred, of abuse, of nastiness, and you see the hate crime, like that poor man who died in Harlow a few days ago. And what have you achieved at the end of it? You've achieved a lot of hatred, you've achieved a lot of blame, but you've not built one house, you've not employed one doctor, you've not trained one teacher, you've not given one child a nursery place, you've achieved absolutely nothing. But when you unite a community together and say the problems of housing, the problems of education, the problems of health, the problems of work are because we live in a deeply unequal society. We cannot afford this level of inequality. We can afford to invest to end the inequality and tax appropriately to make sure it happens. And so, as we go back to Parliament on Monday, we'll be challenging this government on the poverty, on the inequality, challenging Theresa May on a wish to repeal the Human Rights Act and walk away from the European Convention. We will be standing up for human rights in Britain and all over the world. We will be standing for the kind of society and kind of community we want to live in. It's this unity of bringing so many people together that in some cases is a difficult lesson for some people to understand. But once the genie is out of the bottle, once the determination of all of us together to bring about that better society, to ensure that those with disabilities are not poor and discriminated against, those with difficulties with mental health are not discriminated against, those living in poverty can see some light at the end of the tunnel. That is the strength of this movement. That is the strength of all of us when we come together. So I conclude with this. Thank you for coming. Thank you for what you said. Thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for trying to create a decent, harmonious, socially just society in Britain and be that influence around the world. Thank you very much.